Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jina Hamid, and I'm the Programs Manager with the Center for Book Arts. Thank you all so much for tuning into our final installment of the Book Arts Toward Liberation series, Collectivities and Co-Authorship with the Black School and Emory Douglas. This program is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Captions are available by clicking on the closed caption icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We ask that all participants use the chat to post any questions or responses and to keep cameras and microphones off throughout the event. We're so thrilled to partner with Jina, Valentine, and Heather Hart of Black Lunch Table, who curated and moderated this 4-part series, harnessing a space to discuss themes and topics within the intersection of Blackness, production, and creative placemaking. This program was made possible with the support of Stephen Burry, Deirdre Lawrence, David Solo, and all those who donated to today's event and the Broadsides for Black Futures fundraiser. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jina Valentine and Heather Hart, who will introduce our speakers this afternoon.
Thank you, Jenna. And thanks, Devin. Thank you to CBA. I'm Heather Hart, and I just wanted to give you a brief statement of our Artist Versus series. So this summer, Jina and I were both watching Jill Scott and Erykah Badu on Versus TV. We're dancing, finding a recipe and cooking each other in our respective cities. And we felt a soothing to our souls. We felt broken from staying inside and embattled by the news. But this moment was a salve. These are musicians who have been and remain seminal for us. They transport us, spark a soundtrack to our memory. Seeing them empathize with us and with each other as we sheltered in place, they reached through digital space to create something together. And it felt like a moment we will log into our collective archive. They connected us through our phones, tablets, laptops, and desktops all over the world for one evening. They connected us. Folks in all of the places felt this love, mutual respect, and community despite all odds.
Hi, and I'm Jina Valentine. Prompted by this series, we consider the outer limits of what constitutes a book, or specifically an artist book. So thinking artist plus book, artist equals book, and we determined that books contain language in many forms and invite a corporeal experience of media and speech acts. We considered the book as it is constitutive of the archive and as it is representative of the body. So a body of knowledge or an extension of the body. And from these considerations, we determined abstract themes for our 4-part series. So we thought of coded language, technical writing, the corpus, body as archive, and multivocality and self-authorship. These categories have guided our conversations around and planning for this series.
Our collaboration with the Center of the Book Arts culminates with today's conversation around collectives and co-authorships. We both immediately thought of talking with Shawnee Peters and Joseph Cuillier III, co-founders of the Black School, an experimental art school teaching radical Black history. And then we began imagining who they should be chatting with. Our dreams came true when Emory Douglas, artist, graphic designer, and the former Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, accepted. Today's conversation is crafted around the following ideas. Language as amplified via multiple authorships disrupts authorial singular agency. Self-publishing and collective publishing are radical gestures. Resource, knowledge, and access equity are goals for liberation and mutual uplift. Co-authorship, collective ideation, production, and promotion displace capitalist agendas. All power to the people.
Given the various ways Emory, Shawnee, and Joseph's practices have engaged the public and the community, we're so excited to host this conversation as our finale in this series for the Center for Book Arts. So we'd like to keep our introductions here pretty short so they can dive into this conversation. In lieu of offering formal, lengthy biographies, we'd like to suggest that you visit the Black School's website, where you can find out more about their workshops, events, exhibitions, and their current planning for their schoolhouse, and learn more about how you can support their project. Emory Douglas is, well, the artist, graphic designer, and was the Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party. And as such, has amplified the voices of the people and inspired so many of us to do what we do. Please go to his Wikipedia page to learn more about him, and perhaps you can even add to it. Well, we could not be more excited to welcome you three here today. And with that, we'll turn things over.
Thank you, guys.
Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here today and to engage and interact with everyone. I'll initially start off with showing some context to the art that I did historically and how I integrated into the work that I do today, so that when discussion goes on, you'll be able to see the context of how the designs came together and what limited access to materials that were available that I was able to use. I will now do that right now. Take me one moment, please. I'm on. Disappeared. Okay, here. In the beginning in the graphics in the Black Panther Party, we had limited materials to use. And so we had to use in the artwork, applying it to the artwork to give depth and meaning to the work, the visual, talking about in a visual context. I used to use these prefabricated materials and integrate it into the art that came out of this particular book called Format, because it was the least expensive of all the books during that time. And out of that book, you would have these design letter styles and those things in the book, and it tell you the page that you go to. Then when you went to that page, then you would see these letters and the different sizes of stuff that you could use. But then you had a whole sheet of them that came together like this, that you pick once you pick the code number, and then that code, you take it to the art store, they look up that code and they pull out the sheet. And on the sheet would have all these alphabets. And this is how we would make up the headlines and for the designs that integrated into the artwork. Even when we did community graphics or we're doing graphics for in-house graphics specifically for the newspaper. Well, 95% of the work was in the newspaper. Here's to show you what it looks like when you put it together. The words, cutting out the letters and putting them in place on the sheet. Then you cut that, place it in place on your artwork. This is showing you an actual design of you. This whole design was done using those cutout letters, as I showed you here. That's it here, and this is it here. And I had to do this with markers, this kind of thing. The only thing I was given here was the photographs, and so I had to work out the design concept for both the front and back of this just cover, community graphics during the Panthers during that time. Contemplating the word peace, relative, this is the more recent stuff, but I want to use this. This came out of a more expensive book that you every now and then, because it had the more designer elements of fonts in it in the back part. So we use that, but sometimes we would photograph them and cut them and put them together. And this is what I did. These on the copy machine and redesigned them and played with the word peace being relative and being attacked today and those kinds. So that was why I want to use the particular font. These are patterns to show you when you see some of the art historically, or I have seen it, and I'll show a few of them, is that these were patterns and they were sheets just like the alphabets, the fonts were. Where you go, you give a code. If you see under that code, they take you to the art store, then they would go in the back and get that particular sheet, and you'd have these patterns. And I would integrate these patterns into the artwork. The artwork would usually be lines done with markers or pens, because basically that's what we had. And when you see the Panther newspaper, it was usually one color plus black ink plus one other color. 99% of the work in the Panther newspaper was like that. And so here again, showing you those sheets again, as you know, and here's somewhere I used them, had them historically. Even when I was going to City College, just had them. And when I worked for the Black Press in the 80s and the 90s, they were still using some of these materials then as well. And so just to show you how I put them together, I do a line drawing artwork. Then thereafter, I made a stat, put it on a stat, and then I apply all the different patterns to give it the depth to it. As you can see here again. Here again is showing you how it's done, showing real more patterns in it, cut out. It becomes very quickly, after you do it expediently, when you after you get a hold, after you start doing it for a while. So, you know, this is still one color, black plus ink plus using different textures and contrastings of black. So you have to visualize these things when you're doing it. Here's the showing you more stuff I've done recently, but applying the same principles. We're using different, integrating different textures and stuff into the artwork and patterns and what have you, you know, visual language. Here again, historically, community work, doing graphics, cutting them up, lining them up, cutting and pasting, all those things together. Same thing, community graphics, using the cutout letters, patterns, all this stuff. You have to visualize it there. You have to understand the context of it. Same thing here. Same thing here. Here again. These are the materials when we wax them. This is called electroset waxer. This is how you wax the back of your material to adhere it in place. You had the wax, box of wax, and they come in these little sheets. You had them, and you stick them down in here. This was a cord that went into the wall, and they had a roller on it. And when the wax melted in there, you roll it across the back of your paper. This is the actual waxer here. And it wasn't permanent unless you did it real thick. So you do it lightly, so you could tack it in place. Then if you need to pull it up, you could, if it needs to be. This is the kind of camera we had back in the day. This is called the vertical camera. This is called the horizontal. This is the one that we had. But the same principle. In here, this one you had to be in a dark room in order to pull out the film, to put it in the back here, to close it up to the image that's on the board here. When you turn it on, the light lamps would hit that and the light bounce back into, flex back the image back into here on the, where you had the artwork on the back of the camera board. And so then you would have to develop it in the trays. Same principle here, you put the film up here, the artwork was down here, you had two lamps on the side. Once you set the timer for how many seconds you want the lights to flash on there, that bounces the image back up onto the film that you have in here. And once it does that, then you take it and you put it in trays and you develop in the same way that you would develop any film for photo back in the day for any photograph or what have you. So this is basically what I want to just give you a little insight in to the context of how the graphics were done during that time. These, you see the graphics, this is Benny Harris, this was our printer, young man, who made this press was given to us like you have a car with no wheels, no windows, no engine. Well, he took that and put that whole press together. It was just a shell. And that became, we could print everything except a newspaper with this printing press. And these are some of the most first posters and stuff that we did during that time. So thank you much for that.
Thank you, Emory. That was amazing. Ooh, okay, so we got even more questions now, but we're gonna go ahead and share a screen. Show just a few slides of how we work. So Heather already gave introduction of the Black School, Experimental Art School, pair art making, especially public community-based art making with Black radical histories. We do this through a 3-part ecosystem, we call it, beginning with the art school, the workshops that we initiated, mostly doing in schools or museums, community centers, mostly with youth to begin, although we really vision the Black school as being fully multi-generational and for the whole Black community. Then after our first year of running art workshops, we held our first festival, our first Black Love Fest, where we share the work that students make with us over the course of a year. We invite other visual artists or artists in general who especially need an audience of mostly Black people to really do their community-based work. We also invite musicians and vendors and have food and just really try to make a really beautiful celebratory day that really allows us to do 2 things to kind of demonstrate this world that we want to live in, which is centered in Black love, right? Really trying to give thought and attention, focused attention to the concept of Black love, what it is and what it should mean for this nation, right? And then finally, after our second year, we initiated our design firm as a way to do a few things to tangibly generate resources for our young people. So it's so important that we come together and we make work that is rooted in our communities and that helps to resolve our own issues for ourselves. But we know that we're not going to get paid for that, right? And our students don't come to us with trust funds, right? With these footings in the Western art world. So they need resources, right? So in order to ensure that they are able to commit their time and energy to making the community art with us, we train them in graphic design so that we can offer them paid positions taking on client work. So we pay to train them and we pay them to take on real world client work.
Okay. So the first work we're sharing with y'all is the Black School magazine. This is issue 1, the Black Love issue. So we completed this magazine in collaboration with some young people at St. Hope Leadership Academy. We brought in like a bunch of different artists like in our community, Latasha Nevada Diggs to teach poetry, Eric McNeil to teach styling and fashion, Tiffany Smith to teach photography. And we had the students create these works in these workshops we did. And then we combined all of the work into a magazine and published it, which we sell and we share in exhibitions and different things. And this is just an example of like how we incorporate publishing into our work and co-authorship. So all of the work in the magazine, in the design of the magazine, was done in collaboration with young people.
This is our process deck. We have a lot of plans for making all of our curriculum transparent and widely accessible. But to begin, this is the most accessible piece of curriculum that we have to share. We developed it after our first year of workshops where we were finding that we were having these amazing conversations with students and really getting into the heart of what's happening in their neighborhoods. And what they can and want to do about it. But then when it was coming to art making, it was kind of getting very general. We would see posters that would just say like hope and love. And of course, hope and love, we need that and it's really important. But we wanted to really give some tangible support to making sure that people can articulate exactly what's happening in their neighborhoods and helping to give that language and helping to just make sense of these really complex, intertwined socioeconomic issues, right? So we developed it to use in our own workshops. We continue to use them in our own workshops. but we also sell them and have an app that is available to share with community organizers and educators that are not, able to purchase them. But like the magazine and like the design studio, all of these are also meant to be independent revenue generation for us. Our 3 core principles are Black love, wellness, and self-determination. So eventually we want to be, not reliant on funders, on institutions, on foundations, or even on private donors. We want to be able to self-sustain our work. So all of these items that we're able to sell go towards doing that.
So the next project is a future project that we're sharing with you. Something we've been working over the last couple of years to realize, a physical home for the Black school. So these are some sketches we put together to demonstrate the Black schoolhouse, like what we want it to be. And I'm originally from New Orleans. My family has like a long history of being part of the educational landscape of that city. So we're now working to transition to move down to New Orleans in the next year, like the beginning of next year, and build the schoolhouse that will house all of our activities, like the art school, the design firm, and also expand on what we've already been doing. So we want to include an artist residency where folks can stay at the Black school, teach workshops, put on an exhibition in the gallery downstairs. We have a collection of books from a local writer in Harlem who passed on, and his family donated his estate, his books to us. So we're going to house those in our reading room and meditation space. We intend to have a maker's lab in the kitchen so we can feed the school, and in a small little garden farm where we can grow our food. So we're thinking of like this school as like a community center that will take like a holistic experiential learning approach to community education, community art, community design.
Mm-hmm. And all of that, really this concept of imagining a school as a community center is rooted in, and the reason that we call ourselves the Black school to begin with is rooted in the sort of imagination that Black folks collectively have on pre-integration, on that one room Black schoolhouse. So we've really gotten into researching our history of Booker T. Washington. They're known as the Rosenwald schools because that was a philanthropist that supported monetarily this concept, but it was Booker T. Washington's vision. Together, they were able to get over 5,000 of these schools built in the South, in the early 1900s, even late 1800s. And one way that they did that, which leads us back to publication, is by actually sharing the building plans. So they would go to different communities, rural areas where people didn't have schools for their kids. The white schools weren't trying to accept Black people, and say, we have everything you need here, these plans on how to build it. And communities had to put up, the labor and like half of the resources, and Rosenwald covered the other half. And again, they got over 5,000 of these schools built. So what we want to do with our plans for the schoolhouse we're designing is share those as well. And we're working with a team of really amazing architects, and they've all committed to making their drawings publicly accessible, thinking of sort of a contemporary, low cost, modular way of building, and making that accessible and desirable for Black communities. Is something that is a future publication project that we're working on alongside these plans of building the school. Yeah.
Okay, so those are our slides. Thank y'all for allowing us to share.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, everything before we even got to thinking about this legacy of the Booker T. Washington schools, our primary inspiration sources are the freedom schools of the civil rights era and the liberation schools of the Black Panther Party. We just swim around in this history, look at so much of Mr. Douglas's work. I'm back to calling you Mr. Douglas. And so it's such a pleasure to see that presentation of work that we haven't seen from you, and to really get that breakdown and insight into your design process. It's really special for us.
Yeah, I think that the idea for the Black School came from like this radical imagination, this idea of like, what if the Panthers had their own art school? And like so many Black artists, especially Black artists that are rooted in community, they have these traumatic experiences of going to art school and really not having a socially relevant education and not seeing themselves and being kind of indoctrinated in this Eurocentric idea of art. And we were trying to like rethink that, like what would it look like of community and activism and radical Black politics and history were rooted at the center of the school. And essentially, what would care and empowerment of Black students look like if it was rooted at the center of the school?
Yeah. Well, for myself, I think I became informed in the Black arts movement, which I was able to carry over. And when I I was basically self-taught. So I did go to City College of San Francisco and take up commercial art, which I was able to apply when I came into the Black Panther Party. We did have our own school called Oakland Community School. It started around 1970, 71. You had people like Rosa Parks who came through, stayed with us a couple of weeks. You had Maya Angelou. She used to come in and speak to the classes, those things and what have you. And it was about not teaching the kids what to think, but how to think, so they can analyze for themselves. We also had the kids had their own committee in which they went in front of when they were acting up in school, and it was called Method of Correction, where you had those who were on that board were their peers who determined what the method of correction would be for them acting up in school. So you had those kinds of things. You had many people. Oscar Brown came through back in the day when he was living and did a couple of weeks of performances with the kids. You had Abby Lincoln, Abinata Masika, who came through on occasion. You had all kinds of folks who came through and were enthused about the educational aspect of the school itself. Yeah, and so that and I guess you could say that subliminally played in some of the works that I do today and continue to do as well. It was about informing, enlightening, and educating. It was about a language, communicating. Yeah.
I love looking at those photos of Erica Hudgens and Rosa Parks. Like, it just warms my heart to think about, you know, that space existing, and then like the community just being in support of that space existing.
Yeah. And no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Since we talk about the school, I want to like open it up and talk about the social programs in general. In our previous conversation, we talked about the Panther social programs as collective care. What do you think the role and the importance of building compassion and care in communities in revolutionary politics? What's the role that plays?
Well, it has to be guided by love in order to even, you know, whether you're aware of that or not. When you take the conviction you want to transform something, change things, it may sometimes, it depends on what's the level of consciousness and awareness, how you come into that and how you look at it and evaluate it, you know. Yeah. But it's in relationship to even begin to be wanting to do something itself, you know, is love itself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really important for us. Placing love at the forefront of everything we do. Because I think like that's where the care comes from. And that's where like the realizing that we have everything we need in our community, and it all starts with love, you know, to really transform our communities into the just and healthy and vibrant and abundant spaces they could be. Like love is that energy that it all emanates, all of those ideas emanate from.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also it's a challenge too. You have to understand, but we're still living in this colonial mentality in many ways and transforming, and this is what this is all about. Negating that, overcoming those that mental bondage, the colonization of the imagination.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm sorry. We always say, you know, Black community is not a monolith, right? We talk about the Black community, and it's amazing that with this vast country we have, that there is as much connection between us. But you know, we're in all kinds of different mind states. Yeah. So the thing that I love to think about in terms of like this clear focus on Black love is that that's a place that allows us to get us away from all those things that we might disagree on, or those I might call this that and you might call that. And so without that love, then we allow that thing to keep us from working together. But if we put love first, then we can actually work together. And we see with this election what impact we have when we're collectively working together. So we really like the idea of thinking of love as the bridge to make that happen.
But it can be relative, it can be principle too. In that context, all that, you know. Just, you know, because it's all guided by love, but it has to be some kind of principle to it.
That's right.
All those things that bring it together. So we're dealing with human nature. So the pendulum of human nature swings all back and forth, up and down, all kinds of ways. So we have to have some kind of guide and principles that guide us. Loving principles that guide us.
That's right.
So speaking of principles, I want to ask you about like how the Panthers were kind of embedding those principles into new recruits. So we talked before about new Panther recruits learning from reading Black radical politics and just radical left politics in general, and learning through observation. So learning through what y'all were already doing. So how did these tactics come to form like the pedagogical approach, the teaching approach to the Panthers?
Well, it was on the job training. It wasn't like we had 50 years of experience. You know, this was a youth movement. You know, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, that first cadre. I mean, I was 21 going on 22, and Huey Newton was 23, but he was leap years ahead in his thinking. And you had Bobby Seale and Eldridge, who were old folks of the party, because they were 28 and 30 years of age. So this first collective of cadre was a part of the youth movement. So it was basically on the job training as we evolved. You had people who came in who had, and when we evolved, it was first a lot of those people who were sisters and brothers who were in the community who were confronted on a daily basis by the state, abuse by the state on a local level, being beat down by the police and all those things that were taking place. So they came in as warriors, but at the same time, their commitment was to deal with those issues and to confront them. But then sometimes you had people who came in who were needed with skills to help us build as well. So you had those kinds of things that had to mix together and make them work. So you had, and out of those limitations and the problems that we had, you had to resolve them in order for the organization to grow. So that meant that when you had contradictions in the party from youngsters and coming in and speaking a language and being disrespectful and just to each other, and particularly young brothers coming in and being abusive language and what have you towards sisters, that had to be resolved because it has caused conflict within the organization. So we had to have those brothers who did that had to work under those sisters to respect the sisters. There were other also, and we also had to have all these things were in place, but it's an ongoing process. it doesn't mean, the growth and consciousness goes at different levels. So you have to always have evaluations and constructive criticism and self-criticism within meetings and discussions. And make it clear that people have a right within those discussions to express what it is, and then it can be articulated and resolved to the point of where some policy is in place so we can move forward, and those kinds of things, And but going on the sidebar to the school with the kids, we used to talk about the showing the kids tender love and care, because we understood that when they got 18 years old, they got to go into the real world. So you try to deal all the compassion and stuff that you can, because when you got 18 years old, they're into the real world. You see, so that was the important part. I mean, when we had pamphlets, parents of kids who lived in the collective. The house is now a landmark in Oakland, where you can go by that. People can live in that house, but they can't tear it, just damn it, however it looks now. That's the way people can move in there, can live in it. But it's a landmark in Oakland, and that was the house that we had for our kids who lived in the collective. Right. And we had passing. We went 24 hours, 7 days a week, around the clock. It was a 2-story Victorian, huge house, where we all the floors, made all the beds, put all the furniture in. And we had not only ourselves, we had people in the community that had those skills to come in and work with us, you see, because they were inspired, they seen it, and loved what it was about as well. So those kinds of, that's lessons there. That's learning. That's on the job learning by doing, by example, leading by example. That's the important thing, being guided by example. We can hypothetically talk, conversation, and have a great conversation, but when we implement it, putting it into practice, making it become a reality, is how you overcome the obstacles that you may be confronted with in that context. The beauty of our conversation may seem like a straight line between A and B, but you may come into all challenges and obstacles that you have to deal with. So if you haven't got in the way of dealing with those and critiquing, evaluating, and how to move forward, and going back at it again, then it can limit the possibilities of achieving your goal.
I love how you're talking about how y'all were dealing with the chauvinism that was present in the party through like directly having those brothers kind of learn under the women in the party. And I also remember you talking about how like the care for the children was like dispersed, not just concentrated amongst the women, but if the women was working, then the men were holding the babies, and caring for the babies.
That was the whole thing. Men had and sisters all had equal responsibilities. Brothers had to learn how to wash dishes, had to take care of the babies. Of course, the babies were considered pamphlet kids. So therefore, when we had the child care centers, you had brothers who ran the child care centers. You have well-known DJ, sister named Abacha, who's a well-known DJ. She would work with us closely. And she always mentions that when she was the first time she ever seen brothers carrying babies on their back and in their arms when she seen the Panthers doing it back in the day, because that was a part of the response. On the newspapers, you had brothers who had to learn how to do typing on the newspaper. All these things, skills and stuff that were just relegated to gender, specific gender, was negated in the Black Panther Party. And that don't mean there were still these levels of consciousness that went on. There were still these things, shortcomings and limitations you had to deal with, but you had policies in place. Say, for example, when they were having babies within the organization and seeing that the sisters had to take care of the children, we began to have meetings to explain that the babies were our babies. So we all gonna have to take care of the babies, and that we were setting up the child care center so that we would have brothers who worked at some of the child care centers, took care of the kids, and coordinated the child care center working with the Panther and the community child care centers. So you had Panther kids and community kids were in the child care center.
And how did you all establish those policies?
They came out of need. It wasn't like, you know, now you see all those things, so you have a vision of possibility of those things, setting them up. But they came out of need at the time. I think the child care center came out when Bobby Seale was out organizing in the neighborhood, the community, and he's seen this sister who had this child care center. Wasn't nothing like that then. You know, you maybe had a few people here, there were doing it, but it wasn't on no grand scale. And Bobby seen that, and he said that we could do that on a national level because we had chapters and branches, and that would set an example for others to be inspired by. And you had those who agreed or disagreed with us, but they liked that concept and they did it as well. So that's what called leading by example, vanguard example. You know, you see things, your possibilities of what can happen, and you try to implement them and put them into practice. And people like them, and it grows, like the free breakfast for school kids. They had a vision about that. And then they had people who were inspired by that. And the fact was, it was talked about in the context of kids going to school hungry, on an empty stomach, can't concentrate, can't focus on the lesson because they're hungry. The parents got the option in relationship of paying the rent or having food on the table or having breakfast food before the kids go to school in the morning. So had to make those choices because of the economic situation. Therefore, it was a need. It was a need that was, and talking with people in the community who were inspired by that. We were able to have it out of people's houses, out of community centers. We had out of churches everywhere. People would open up their doors. Is that when we had the breakfast programs in chapters and branches, some more than others, depending on what they could do. You know.
Yeah. All right, we got a lot of questions that we really want to ask, but there's one that I can't get off the this conversation without asking you, and that's you know, we've talked about collective care, about the social programs. I would like to ask how you care for yourself, right? Through everything that you've seen and experienced. There's a lot of folks that didn't make it, right? And you can see there's a lot of people that struggle with those memories. But you're here, clear in mind and spirit, open, you know, generous. And I'm curious, could you share your care regime? And one last follow-up question, does your art making play any role in that?
Well, I think so, but when you have to, you know, we none of us had post-traumatic stress syndrome. It was like in a war zone. You have to understand that's what it was. You know, you know, they spent over $40 million in relationship. Oh, in relationship to trying to destroy and discredit the organization by any means necessary. You know, so that's documented. You know, so there was all kind of psychological things that came into play and caused a lot of and on the process of trust and visions and separation. But everybody overcome that over the years and have come together from all over the different parts of the country and what have you. But dealing with it, I started meditating. I learned I couldn't afford to take classes. So I used to get the books and I learned how to meditate and, you know, clean the stress out over years in the process. And there were other folks I knew who did that. And we used to talk in the party about trying to eat healthy at one point. And so about the late 70s, there was a few Panthers who were vegetarians in the party at that time. And I liked that kind of aura about it, but I didn't know how to go about it. Then I had my kids, and so I had to try to fix meals for them. And it was so bland at the time because I didn't know what I was doing. Then the parents comrades gave me a cookbook that had all these recipes in it for vegetarian cooking. So that opened up another world, you know. And yeah, and so therefore it was from that I became more involved and reading more about health and holistic quality of life. And I started my journey in 1980 up until still today, because I'm a vegan, and I started that journey in
There you go.
1980. Yeah, yeah.
That's just
Yeah.
I have
and at the same time, reading a lot of things dealing with enlightenment about, you know, the self and all those kinds of things. Yeah.
Do you feel like any of that comes out in the way you design and the way you make art? Do you feel like that's part of that spiritual?
I think it plays a role into it. Yes. Yes. You can, in the context of then and now, I think yes. It does. Yeah. And back then, you know, it was still about guided by love, but it was rough. You were in the trenches, win the war, win the battles on. So the artwork reflected that in that context, and it was you know, in the community of the feelings, you know, of the community. You know, you had the same thing back then as you have today. You had over 300 rebellions because in the communities because of young blacks being murdered and being justified. You know what I mean? And that creating resistance and wanting to do something about that. You know, during that time. So it was a pretty intense era. It's the era that the Black conscious movement awareness came about in that period, when you begin to define yourselves as Black, African, Afro-American. All those discussions and debates were going on. The beginning of establishing the Black student unions, which the first or the second one was established in San Francisco State University, I believe, or the first one was in Mississippi State. One of the two were one or two in that order. And so, you know, you had the Black arts movement, which was a national movement, but you had out here in the Bay Area as well. And so getting involved in that, becoming aware of historical facts during that period. Because I remember as a kid, I used to see these two Black men on TV all the time, every time they would come to San Francisco. And I was just awed because we had 3 channels. And every time they would come, they would show them on TV. And I never really knew who they were. When I got in the Black arts movement, I became aware. That was Paul Robeson and W.E. Du Bois. They used to come out to San Francisco all the time. And they used to work for they knew the owner of the Black press, who I used to work for, named Dr. Goodman. And how I knew that is I looked in the archive and saw all those photographs, but every time they would come, it was connecting with Doc during that time. Yeah. You know, so, you know, and then when Fannie Lou Hamer and the delegation from Mississippi, it just happened, I turned on the TV when they went to the Democratic Convention, and they refused to allow them to be seated at the convention. Then I happened to had seen it when they went back again in 4 years, and they were able to be seated at the Democratic Convention. So these kinds of things subliminally play into your consciousness and awareness once you become more aware of and wanting to do things. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have a few questions from the chat. One that is coming up a lot is, could you talk about key books that the students or new recruits were asked to read? And also, are there any contemporary texts that you think could be added to that list that you think are important for young people? Or
I could tell you right offhand, but I'm quite sure there are. We did have reading lists, but because of the fact that back then, during that period in time, when Hugh and them, we used to read Francis Fanon, we read everything. Because what we said, we like when I mentioned, we weren't teaching the kids what to think, but how to think. So if you can show them how to think and analyze things, then you can expose them to all kinds of things, and you can have discussions with them around those issues, so they can have an understanding of how to analyze and look at things as opposed to limited the resources that they may be able to read, and then they have a limited way of critiquing, evaluating things. So it's just a matter of teaching them how to think and how to see through the limitations and what it might be there that they're confronted with. But Frantz Fanon was one of the books that we used to, Wretched of the Earth. That was one of the major books that we used to read during the time. And we had political education classes. Mind you, because we read the books, everybody didn't understand what was in the books. You learned to understand what was in the books. That was for me, myself. You know, it was a foreign language to me. It was like I was learning as I evolved. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Initially, and because Huey and Bobby used to have the red book, the Chairman Mao red book.
Right.
And the students at Cal used to like that book. And so they used to go and sell them in order to make money for to go out in the community on patrols and the technical equipment. But in there, they had some universal principles that we were guided by initially that we took. You know, don't steal a needle or thread from the people. Pay for everything you borrow, return everything you borrow, those kinds of things, you know what I mean? Don't lie, all those kinds of things. There were universal principles that we were able to apply to our own self. As we evolved, we developed our own perspective, an own ideological perspective. I mean, there was interactions also with, you know, different levels. You had Huey and Bobby always dealing with different scholars and intellectuals and discussions and debates, getting ideas from them as well. The school itself, when it was developed, you had professional academician administrators who came in and assisted us. It wasn't like this was just something that we did, but with people that came and held classes with those who were going to be teaching at the school on how to, you know, how to do all that. You know, so it wasn't like we just started it, even though it was a sister in the party said we need to start our own school. And from that, we were able to get together and was able to do it. But we had to get some, in order to get to school at that time, the building, which was a block long, huge building, we had to get some of our allies to do that because they weren't going to sell it to us. And so when they had the press, went there and asked it was a white Presbyterian church building, and asked them, did you know you were selling the building to the Panthers? And they said, no, if we did, we would have sold it to them. So we understood that how we had to use strategy and tactics and have allies and friends that could do certain things that we weren't able to accommodate, achieve at that time, you know, in that context, yeah. But we're always in charge of whatever it is. And we would listen. And we would listen to what, and it was relevant that we could apply it, then we would do that. But we weren't in the business of allowing people to tell us and dictate to us how we should run the operation, you know. So we would kindly take and accept, hear what they had to say.
Yeah. Before time runs out, I want to ask you, you know, about the future of Black liberation movements. So I'm curious to know what you think of like the Black liberation movements that are popping up today, and what are the lessons that the Panthers learned that contemporary movements you think they should know?
Well, one, I would say first they can be inspired by what we did, but you can't duplicate. It's a whole different context that you're coming out of today. And first I would explain it in this context. You know, since then, we didn't have, you know, you had the beginning of the cut back in the social network that helped Black people sustain themselves. You had that coming in under the Reagan administration. Then you had so you mean you had survival, you had in survival mode. Each one is for itself. You know, at the same time that the Black Panther Party was imploding on itself at the same, by the external forces that were creating the conditions and situations for that to take place. Then you had the influx of the crack cocaine into the community. You had babies having babies, 4 generations into that taking place with no kind of, the whole chaos. Then you have the BET and MTV, 24 hours, 365 days a week, year, every day. You didn't have that. We didn't have that. You mass Soul Train once a week, stuff like that. Then you got the youngsters coming in with the hip hop and the raw, rough. You know what I mean? You got that, and they making $1 million out of their trunks of their cars. You see what I'm saying? So you got a whole nother dynamic you're just dealing with now. You're dealing with it, come out of that. That becomes the inspiration for young people who ain't got many other options or see all that, beginning to see that. You know what I mean? Right. Then you got the digital age, and they got all these games they playing, gangster games and all this other stuff. And they can make $1 million by selling CDs out of their trunks to their cars. You got a whole nother dynamics that you're dealing with in the context of, even though that may be a limited part, but that's the whole part that's reflective of a lot of young people who got no other options, who are being pulled into, in that context. Even in the context of the process that you see in the sports with some of they're making the multi-million-dollar contracts, and some of them are trying to do some things. But you see these youngsters, that's all they want to do now. They think about multi-million-dollar, but not in the context of, like some of them are doing, are trying to develop and do things in the neighborhood, in the community. But look at the youngsters out here who admire that, in many cases, said because of the fact that it's a whole nother class of people that you're dealing with, whole nother dynamics that you gotta transform the mindset of how do you deal with it? What is that about? When you make $1 million, who you gonna help? How are you gonna help your community? What you gonna do? That has to be a part of the curriculum. Because some of them gonna be doctors, some of them gonna be lawyers, some of them gonna be in the NBA. Until the system is transformed, you got to enlighten them, inform them, and have curriculum to show them what they're gonna do in relationship to those who got less. What kind of institute, what kind of business they're gonna set up to assist, all those kinds of things. We have to deal with real world issues, real world problem solving.
I want to go ahead.
Sorry, I hate to break this up. I feel like we could really go all day. Seriously, you guys are just getting started, and there's so many questions in the chat that are so valuable too. But before people have to leave, I just wanted to extend our thanks. This has been like the perfect finale. My heart is touched, and I have a bunch of things on my notes to take forward with us. I want to thank Shawnee, Joseph, and Emory today, and thank the Center for Book Arts for hosting us. This is the finale again, so we had a great time. Jina, I don't know if you want to say anything.
No, just big thanks to all of you, and thanks for everyone for coming.
You guys are welcome to chat for 15 more minutes. I just did not want to lose anybody without thanking you.
Thank y'all so much for organizing this.
Yeah, we really appreciate this. Like a dream come true, for sure.
I appreciate it. Much love and much respect.
For sure.
Thank you.
Have a great day and continue this chat. Continue the conversations. Hopefully you guys stay in touch.
Yeah, let's definitely stay in touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah, please do. Please do stay in touch.
All right. We're going to let you go, Emory. We appreciate your time and all your years of work so much.
When the schoolhouse is up and running, we inviting you down. We got a bedroom for you to stay in.
Absolutely.
We could show you around New
Okay.
Orleans. Yeah, have you
I've
come
been
talk
down
to
there.
the people.
Yeah, I was down there for the, I think it's called the People's Congress.
Mhm,
The
mhm.
ones who tore all the statues
Yep,
down.
yep.
Yeah, well, the sister invited me down there, and I
Yeah.
went down there. It was like last year, I think.
Yeah.
Last year,
Oh,
before
nice.
last, I believe.
It's hard to be a vegan in New Orleans, though.
Yeah, yeah. Doing it,
Yeah,
though.
there is folks doing it.
Overall.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Love, thank
All
you.
All right.
Have a great day.
Till next time.
Till next time.
Take
Peace.
care.
Okay.
Peace.
Peace.